So let's start with the basic situation, which everybody in this room understands. We spend more money on healthcare than any other country in the U.S., and yet we seem to get less and less for our dollar. Are we making progress in improving that situation?
I think we're making progress, but it's not fast enough. And I think especially with the aging of the population and the amount of innovation that we're doing, whether it's medical devices, biologics, et cetera, I think the cost is going to continue to go up unless we dramatically shift the curve. And the first attempt at that was the Affordable Care Act. Another attempt at that is going to be the Republican version of that. And that's just using a blunt instrument to reduce both price and utilization. And I think there's got to be a different way to deal with it.
But I'm going to come back to the Affordable Care Act and whatever it is we're doing right now in a minute. But before we do that, talk about, because it's not like you've been standing still. I mean, you've doubled your size in the last couple of years. There's a lot going on at NewYork-Presbyterian. Talk about the things that you have been able to do absent a clear legislative framework.
Well, we made a decision that we were going to regionalize healthcare, that we were going to do much more in the way of population health. But over the past 2 years, we made a distinct decision that we were going to move totally into telehealth and telemedicine. And I'm constantly reminded by people that we don't call it telebanking, we call it banking. And we are convinced that telemedicine is going to be both a cost reducer and a quality improver.
Is it happening already?
Oh, yeah. We're doing it. It's quite common, I think, in many places of the country to do telestroke, teleradiology.
What does that mean, telestroke?
Patient comes into a community hospital emergency room, potential stroke diagnosis, connected to a center that specializes in stroke therapy, decision made about should that patient have a clot buster, should that patient then go to an interventional procedure. In fact, there are a number of ambulances across the country now that can make that diagnosis. So X-ray image gets sent back to the main place, patients in the ambulance, decision made about giving somebody a clot buster.
From the ambulance to your hospital?
Yes.
That's so cool.
There are about 5 or 6 of them in the country. I think Cleveland Clinic has one, we have one, but this is going to become more widespread. That's just one example of an application for telemedicine, telehealth.
That should have an effect on costs.
Yeah.
I mean, are you seeing that?
We've seen with the ambulance, we've seen dramatic reductions in time to therapy, which means saving brain cells, which means getting somebody up and active quicker, not going to a nursing home, and so on and so forth. So I think that there's no question about it that it's going to save.
What do you think, Dave? I mean, are we making progress, higher quality, lower cost care?
I think in our country, we are kicking butt at treating disease. We're pretty good at it. We've got some of the most remarkable cancer treatments. They're available here before anywhere in the world. And the same is true for heart disease. Some of these new cholesterol-lowering medicines were here before anywhere in the world. We're awesome at that. Where we're failing is prevention. We ain't doing much. So there are simple ways that we can prevent heart disease, cancer, delay possible onset of Alzheimer's and others, yet we're not doing them. We tell people in our country, you do whatever you want, and then we as a society will pay for the healthcare ramifications of your decisions. Yeah. And that's crazy. You know, there are countries that say, you're welcome to smoke, and there are companies now saying the same, but we're going to charge you 3 times more in health insurance. You're welcome to skip your colonoscopy, they'll tell you in Singapore, but you're going to have to pay for part of your care if you get colon cancer.
So you're seeing improvement in that area? I mean,
well, we're seeing that across the world, but we're not seeing it as much here. So we need to get men, because there's a notion of it's free will. You're allowed to smoke, you're allowed to be obese, you can sit all day, you cannot take your Lipitor, your aspirin, and then we'll pay for that, the end stage, if you will. You know, but what happens is the non-smokers subsidize the smokers. The people sitting all day are subsidizing the people who are actually exercising and trying to prevent. We need to bring back responsibility for healthcare.
Well, I mean, one of the reasons that's so hard is because the healthcare system is so fractionated. I mean, you run the hospitals, you don't run the insurers, you don't run the. Can you affect the kind of change that Dave is talking about for NewYork-Presbyterian?
I think so. I think that the emphasis on regionalized healthcare, on taking care of all populations, I think that was started with the Affordable Care Act. I think that will move forward. But I also want to comment on this idea of prevention. If you're going to prevent disease, you have to insure people. If you're not insuring people with adequate insurance, it's difficult to prevent. And so I think one of the aspects of policy that we all have to be cognizant of is, do we think that healthcare is a right or is it a privilege? If we think it's a right, then everyone should get insured. If we think it's a privilege, then you can start moving down the path of who gets insurance and who doesn't.
And then it's up to the insurers to provide the incentives?
Well, look, I think
care?
that let's look at the Medicaid population. The Medicaid expansion, which is one of the pieces that's now being debated. Medicaid expansion occurred in many states. It didn't occur in some. And now the proposal is to reduce Medicaid funding by $880 billion over 10 years. Now, to qualify for Medicaid in a state that has not expanded Medicaid, you're talking about making less than, in many states, less than $6,000 a year. You're a family of 3. Now that to me is a problem. No one's going to get prevention under those circumstances. And to David's point, what then happens is the first time that person enters the healthcare system, they're diabetic, they're smoking, they've got chronic lung disease, they've got heart disease, and so on and so forth.
But there's a misalignment, right? I mean, if you're an insurer and the average time on a health plan in our country is 3 or 4 years, why should I prevent your heart disease if I don't think it's going to happen for 10 years from now? So we're misaligned. I'm not incentivized as an insurer to do it. Doctors are incentivized to treat, not prevent. There's a major misalignment here.
Well, and I want to come back to that, but let's talk for just a second about government policy. And I don't want to be the cynic here, but
there is government policy?
Yeah, I was going to say, this issue is not going to get resolved. I mean, you may have a bill out of the House of Representatives this week. It's going to be completely rewritten in the Senate. Maybe you get a bill out of Congress this year. It's going to be refought in the election of 2018. There is not going to be stability in healthcare policy. And so my question for the two of you is, if that's the case, how much progress can we make, government policy aside?
I think we can make a lot of progress, and that's why I'll get back to why we're spending so much time on telemedicine. I really believe that if you go through all the use cases of telemedicine, which I can give you examples of, that it will dramatically reduce cost, and it will improve quality. We can now see patients in urgent care, an emergency room setting. We can see them in and out in 25 minutes as compared to a couple of hours. That saves costs in the emergency room. There are artificial intelligence, machine learning tools to help improve operational flow through the organization. That saves a lot of money. There are a number of different applications of telestroke, telepsychiatry, where you can deliver the specialist care right at the bedside. So I really believe that that's going to be something that we should all be cognizant of. And there are many companies now who are coming up with these solutions.
What do you think, Dave? How much progress can we make without clarity in government policy?
I think everybody in this country has a right to health care. I think no family should have their entire family brought down because somebody is sick catastrophically and it takes entire resources, makes them sell their house and restructure everything they're doing.
But to be fair, I mean, most people do have insurance.
Well, right, but we had another 20+ million on the books since the Affordable Care Act. You cannot get rid of 1,000 pages of legislation without something really to replace it and change it. There are parts of Obamacare that were working, and there were parts that were not working. And what we need to do is be real adults, sit down at a table and say, how can we improve parts of it? But at the same time, that's healthcare finance. And you have to say, healthcare, health, and healthcare finance, in the end, are two separate things. For the last 15 years or so, the government has X bandwidth on health, and it's all been about healthcare finance. We need to change that discourse, and it really means a restructuring of things, and I think talking about it, and starting to look at value-based care. And it's a weird word, but this is going to be the mantra over the next several years, and certainly telemedicine is part of value-based care, is how do you do things? Right now, every pharmaceutical company with a new drug in cancer, it's $140,000 a year, irrespective of the value. You know, when you leave a hospital, you get a bill. You don't get an itemization of what everything costs. I can't say, listen, I broke my leg, it's a simple thing. Let me see which of the 5 hospitals, what it costs to put a cast on it, because I want to do what's most value. You can't do that. It's the only system in the world that, in a sense, doesn't have a price list even.
Now, you don't need legislation for that to happen, right, Stephen? But you do need the government, because the government is providing, you know, Medicare and Medicaid are providing.
Yeah, it's 150 million patients.
Are they moving in that direction?
They started to move in that direction of value-based care, penalizing people who didn't provide high quality, encouraging population health with the Affordable Care Act.
Transparency.
Transparency.
Information.
I think that that's why this current debate is destructive. I think you got to move it forward as opposed to going all the way back to the beginning, and that is the most disconcerting.
So what do you, this conference is really dedicated to innovation and the cross-section of industry.
And it's pro-innovation, right?
We're for it.
Oh, good.
We're all for it, right? Everybody for it? Mm-hmm. So what do you see going on out there that you think is the most interesting?
Oh, God, there's a ton of stuff. Where should we start? Genetics.
Give us a priority list.
I think cancer genomics is just incredibly innovative. I think that there is a lot to learn in cancer genomics. I think there are going to be a lot of applications to it. So I think cancer genomics, precision medicine writ large, is a huge issue. I think that our experience now in device development is really accelerating. You look at the percutaneous valves that are being placed, aortic valves, mitral valves. That whole device development field is really moving ahead dramatically. And I think, as I said before, if you look at artificial intelligence as a stack, I think every aspect of that is going to influence medicine. And I can't stress enough how...
So that's not just diagnosis you're talking about.
It's not just diagnosis. And this has disrupted every industry. It's going to disrupt healthcare.
You said, I'm going to tell on you if you don't mind. You said backstage when Dave said we're still going to need doctors, you said, we may not need all those doctors.
We probably won't. And I'll give you a perfect example of that. We've looked at and co-developing with a company a machine learning, sort of neural network echocardiogram company. So you can teach somebody in 2 hours how to do an echocardiogram, sonogram of the heart. That usually takes 5 or 6 weeks to train a sonographer. As this technology evolves, reading an ejection fraction, the pumping function of the heart, can be done as good as, if not better than, an expert cardiologist. Reading the stenosis or the tightness of the aortic valve can be done as good as, if not better than a cardiologist. And so you can easily see you're not going to have echocardiograph techs. You're not going to have as many ultrasonography cardiologists. And we can go down and look at the same things in radiology and in pathology. So this idea of healthcare being 1 out of every 9 jobs in the country, I think, is going to start to go away.
See, I'm thinking, Dave, if I'm having a serious heart problem, even if a machine can tell me that, I'm going to want to have somebody I can look in the eye.
I think on the diagnostics things, you're probably right. I think on the therapeutic side, on the caring side, you're never going to replace a human being, and I don't think you want to. I think it's a very interesting world we're at now. If you would have, I love all those advances, but they're high-techy. To me, the low-tech advance, and we actually have 2 companies here working on in the conference, is one of compliance with a medication.
Yeah.
So I can tell you a medication, if you're not going to take it the right way, it ain't going to work. And then society has to bear the ramifications of that. That's going to be a key one.
Yeah, no, I spent yesterday in a prize judging contest, and there was the Chicago Tribune won the award, or was one of the finalists for the award, with a series of stories where they went into pharmacies and gave prescriptions of 2 drugs that interacted poorly, in a couple of cases actually could cause death. And the pharmacies failed more than 50% of the time to tell them about the drug interaction.
Well, look, a couple
That's
of things.
Fixable.
Yeah.
It is, but let me just disagree with you on a couple points. If you can do an echocardiogram in sub-Saharan Africa for patients who are at risk for rheumatic heart disease, that's a big deal. If you can do a fetal sonogram in Africa where there's 1 obstetrician for 1 million lives, it's a big deal. And it will be a big deal in our country too. So these techniques will change dramatically the access to primary care and primary prevention. And I would also disagree on one other point. There are many things that machines do better than human beings. Empathy may not be one of them.
Empathy is not one of them yet.
But I think that if you take a look at some of the studies on dermatologists looking at melanoma lesions, expert dermatologists do extremely well compared to a machine. General practice dermatologists don't do as well in terms of identifying a melanoma. So I don't think doctors are going to go away.
But I agree with you. I mean, but every example you've given is linear diagnostics. I mean, there's simple diagnosis, interpreting an image. Yes, machine vision, artificial intelligence, machine learning will be very good at interpreting images, but that's not 90%, 95% of medical care is the opposite, and they're not going to be as good at that.
I would venture to say that complex diagnosis will occur in our lifetimes, and not that shortly from now.
See, we said, but listen, if you had asked me, are complex diagnosis one of the big problems we have in medicine? The answer is no. I mean, in our country. I mean, you're right, sub-Saharan Africa and other things. But diagnostics, I mean, we can diagnose disease pretty well. I could figure out if you have lung cancer or not. I could figure out what drug to treat you pretty well without a computer for that right now. That being said, big data is going to change everything. Right? A trial came out last year showing that if you had ovarian cancer and want a beta blocker, an inexpensive drug that's generic to treat blood pressure, you live 4.5 years longer. We would have never known that from biology, but big data showed us that, and there's a prospective trial now which is showing that it benefits. So we're going to learn a lot from this big data, if you will, and we're going to learn discrete packet by packet, better ways to answer a question.
I want to open it up to questions in just a second, but before I do that, I just want to ask each of you, if you could change one thing in our healthcare system, if you had the power to change one thing that would make a big difference, what would it be? Dave, you go first.
Tobacco. Outlaw tobacco in our
Just get
country.
rid of it.
Yeah.
Stephen.
Well, that's a big one.
Ha! I went first.
I would make sure we insure everybody. On the public health standpoint, I couldn't agree more. And I think we have to have a national conversation around sugary drinks, like it or not, because the obesity epidemic. But I think if we could just get over the hump and say, we've got a public-private partnership, we're going to insure everybody, and we're going to make sure they have adequate insurance, it would be a big step forward.
That doesn't necessarily mean insure everyone the way the ACA insures everyone. In other words, you don't have to have the full range of care. You don't have to have the same requirements.
No, but I think that this notion...
It could be a catastrophic package.
Yeah.
Possibly some variance in price.
I'm not a big catastrophic insurance proponent, and I'll tell you why. You're 25, you're invincible, you're healthy, so you buy catastrophic health insurance. What if you get a chronic disease? What if you get diagnosed with lupus? What if you get diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis? These are very expensive diseases over a period of time. So I think that just saying catastrophic or, let's skinny down the benefits is not a great idea, personally.
What do you think, Dave?
I think we have to incentivize on the preventive side. And I think we can't just say, listen, let's figure out ways to pay when bad things happen. I think we have to figure out how to put the equivalent of a seatbelt in a car so bad things don't happen as much. And when they happen, they're not earlier in life where we put tremendous resources to them.
You're not in favor of a skinny package either. Neither of you sound like you think a skinnier package would get rid of some of the cost implications of the ACA.
I don't think a skinny package works. I think prevention works. And I think that David has made the point multiple times today, and I think it's an important point.
Let's take questions or comments from the audience right here, please. If you could bring it up to the front. Yes, thanks.
Very good afternoon. My name is Addy. I'm with the family office, my family office, and I'm here to learn about various new frontiers of life sciences. One of the questions I need to ask you all is, what do you see the role of digital therapeutics? You talked about therapy, identifying the disease, but before or after identifying the disease, how helpful it is to go with digital therapy. Digital therapy meaning these devices. There are various ways. I know a lot of companies in Silicon Valley are doing those kind of things.
You've got some companies in this room doing that. So.
Is it the new frontier is the question?
When I moved to LA, I was all excited. I moved from New York to LA. I got a call from one of the biggest directors in town. Said, David, I heard about there's a new digital device to look for prostate cancer. Do you have it? And I was, yes, I have the digit. I think they're important pieces of data that can help, right? people who are sedentary have a dramatically higher rate of heart disease and cancer, yet we have no data element in our electronic data record about how much you move during the day. So it will be advances. It's not going to be the cure-all. You're going to see devices now not just measure movement, but pretty soon they're going to measure your cortisol over time. They're going to measure your insulin, your sugar levels. So the utility of these are going to go up pretty dramatically over the next 12 to 18 months. So there's going to be information that we never thought of before, orthogonal ways of looking at the body, what the physicists call coarse graining. And that may be much more important than sequencing our genome in the long run. So it's going to be a very interesting angle when we learn those dimensions.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yes, right here in the back.
Thank you.
I'll come to you next.
Okay, who's first?
You're first. The man with the microphone wins.
Man with a hat.
And the hat, too.
I thought the lady wins, but anyway, my apologies.
He doesn't have the microphone.
I've come from India and I'm slightly jet lagged, but my question is, I find this a very interesting session. My question is, where have we reached in terms of the following? We have 1.2 billion people down there. Is it possible for the digitization to get to a point where we prevent, I like the prevention part, where you can prevent, say, a stroke from happening just before it happens? How far away are we from having a system where you have a genome and you have a DNA and then you have your medical tests done and you superimpose all of that, have a nice algorithm thrown in which more or less predicts where you're going?
Predictive.
Predictive. Thank you.
I think we're doing much better in terms of predictive analytics, but I think we're a ways away from predicting catastrophic events, whether it's a heart attack or a stroke. Coronary disease, as an example, is not a linear progression of things. So there's a lot of data, for example, on looking at vulnerable plaques where we can image them, and a vulnerable plaque is something that's prone to rupture. But predicting the moment of rupture, difficult to do.
You don't get advanced warning in the blood system?
Well, I think that, we used to think many years ago that a plaque would go from 60 to 70 to 80 to 90 and then it would close off. That's not the way it happens. It goes from 20 to 100 in the course of a couple of seconds. So I think predictive analytics in terms of being at risk and at higher risk is going to get better and better. Predicting the actual moment, I think, is a ways away. That's my opinion.
All right. The question right here, and then I'll come over here. Do you have the microphone? Please identify yourself.
I do. I'm Mary Jane Minkin. I'm an OBGYN from New Haven, Connecticut. And I think this is I'm delighted to be here. And I think Brainstorm Health is a fabulous concept. And health is a fabulous concept. What's seemed to me very ironic about the delivery of healthcare or healthcare programs in the United States is they all seem to be basically hospital system based or hospital organizations based. And again, maybe this is because coming from the field of OBGYN perhaps, but to me, when you go to the hospital, except for obstetrics, it represents a failure of the system. It's a failure of health. So why are we dealing with healthcare systems run by hospitals, which represents failure? And we're all talking about prevention, which is extraordinarily important. But the issue is, how come the systems are run by the people who represent the failures? And, again, obstetrics is not a failure.
No offense.
I think, Steve, I think you have to take that question.
I'm a big fan of obstetrics in hospitals, by the way.
So are your kids.
Exactly right. Look, I think that as much prevention as we do, humans are not immortal and humans will get disease. Your point, however, about the hospital being the repository of acute illness and not expanding beyond the four walls and being a force for good in terms of public health is the right point. And we've got to get to that nexus of treating the acute disease, doing the prevention, really partnering with public health to develop a system of care that treats a population. And I think we're moving in that direction. But you're right, we're great at treating acute disease, as David said. We're not as good at prevention. We're not as good at coordination. We're not as good at taking a look at a whole population and saying, let's make them healthier. And to that point, in your field, the maternal mortality rate in this country has not decreased over the past 20 to 30 years. And there's got to be something to that where we have to do a better job. Prevention, prenatal care, to your point.
Apologies, there were a couple of questions over here I didn't get to. Dr. Corwin, Dr. Agus will be around, so you can, the great thing about this conference is it's a community. You can ask the questions after the session. Doctors, thank you very much.
Thanks,
Great way to start.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.